Hi, IA community. My name is Nicole Endacott, and you might know me from a variety of roles. I have fields here at IEA, including Academy Program Coordinator. I coordinate the labs program. I've been an Academy instructor, and I was on site this summer at UNASA West. So today, though, I will be the first in a series of instructors to lead what we're going to call virtual learning labs to help support you and your families and your children during this unprecedented time of going remote, staying home, and learning in a different way. Our biggest goal at IEA is to help make sure that everyone is challenged and all of those bright minds are being able to be as curious and enriched as possible, even in challenging times, such as the period we're in right now. So these are going to be flexible for different ages. You can watch with your child if they're younger, or you can have them watch them on their own. And they will end with an activity, and today's activity will require a writing utensil, paper, markers or colored pencils, and a coin or dice to flip. Today's topic will be on an introduction to Mendelian Genetics. So if that's something you think your child may be interested in, you can bring them in to watch the video with you or send it to them, and we will get started. Okay, Mendelian Genetics. Here we go. So you have probably heard of DNA and genes, but we're going to start by talking about what these words have to do with one another and which ones we'll be talking about the most as we go forward today. So every cell in your body has your DNA in it, and your DNA is what codes for all of the proteins that make you up. Your DNA has about 20 to 25,000 genes on it. Those are little chunks of DNA that code for different traits. And then those genes are on chromosomes, and then those chromosomes are in the nuclei of your cells. Today, we'll be mostly talking about the word gene, and even more broken down than that, we'll be talking about how every gene that you have, for the most part, has two alleles. So alleles kind of sounds like alternate or alternative. Alleles are different forms of a gene. So we're going to be talking about single gene traits and genes that just have two alleles today. Maybe if we keep going with the series, we can talk more about the different, more complex types of genetics. But today we'll be talking about genes that have just two versions of what that can be. So in this example here, we're saying that there is an allele for blue eyes and an allele for brown eyes. And every individual for these genes always has two alleles. They get one from each of their two parents. And then the interaction between those two alleles, you see the recessive and dominant here. We'll get to that in a second. The interaction between those two is what determines what trait you have. Obviously, eye color in humans in real life is not just two, there aren't just two options. Humans don't have either blue or brown eyes, just like they're not either 4 feet tall or 6 feet tall. There's a lot of diversity there, same with maybe hair texture, skin color, hair color, things like that. But again, we'll be focusing on these single gene traits and kind of making some assumptions. Maybe we can bust some myths down the road. All right, so we have Gregor Mendel to thank for a lot of these discoveries that we're going to be talking about today, a lot of this science. He is known as the father of genetics because he was one of the first people to really ask questions and do all the time-consuming experiments to figure out how traits are passed down through generations and what makes us, what makes animals, what makes plants, how they are. He lived from 1822 to 1884, and I have a picture of a Google Doodle here from a few years ago that was honoring him and his contributions to science. And you'll see that it is pictures of pea plants because that is what he studied. At first, he wanted to study the genetics of bees, but he accidentally bred a very angry, aggressive strain of bees, so he decided to go pretty much to the safest, most docile species you can think of, which is a pea plant. And he ended up getting really, really lucky because pea plants we know today, have fairly simple genetics compared to other living things. And so it was a perfect plant, perfect species to start with to really get into the idea of inheritance. And this is why, I'll move my video a little bit here. So he looked at 7 traits, all of which, like I was saying earlier, have just 2 options for each of them. So the flowers could be either purple or white. They could be either on the middles of the branches or the ends, axial and terminal. The seeds could be either yellow or green, round or wrinkled. The pods could be either inflated, puffed up, or constricted, like kind of bumpy, and you can see the peas inside. Green or yellow, and then the plants themselves could be either tall or dwarf. And this P here stands for the parents, the parental generation, and this X stands for that there was a cross, that Mendel crossed the 2, he bred them together. And so for his first series of experiments, he bred plants that were completely purple. They came from a long line of purple flowers, and then same with the white flowers. So long line of purple flowers, long line of white flowers. That's all they'd ever been, and he crossed them together and was surprised to see, you can see in this next row here, that all of the offspring flowers were purple. So Mendel asked himself, where did the white flowers go, and why aren't I seeing any white flowers in this second generation? And then that ended up being true for one of the 2 versions for all 7 of these traits. So all of the next generation was tall, green, inflated, round, yellow, axial, and we saw all those other versions just kind of disappear from that generation. So being a scientist, Mendel decided to do another wave of experiments and cross that generation with themselves to see what happened. And there was something else surprising. We're going to be looking at this generation now, all the way to the right. So we saw long line of purple, and then long line of white crossed, all purple, and then this last generation that I'm talking about now, they were about 3/4 that were purple and 1/4 that was white. And you'll see he didn't just do this 4 times and see 4 flowers, 3 which were purple, 1 was white. He did this almost 1,000 times. So 705 purple flowers, 224 white. That's what science is. You have to do things a lot of times to come up with a trend and a possible solution to the thing you're looking for. And then he did this for all 7 traits as well. So not just purple and white flowers, but also the tall and the axial and all those other ones. So what he came up with based on this through looking at all those possibilities and really thinking it through, came up with a theory of inheritance that has to do with the dominant and recessive alleles. And I'll move myself once again. So dominant alleles, if they are present, they cover up and dominate over the recessive allele. Even if there's just one dominant allele and one recessive allele, the dominant one wins out, it masks and covers up the recessive allele, so that that's the trait that you see. For recessive alleles, 2 are needed in order to see that trait. So that might be confusing, so let me get into a little bit more. One thing that's important to note is that we're going to use letters to symbolize these different things. So a capital letter will mean dominant and a lowercase will mean recessive, and we use the letter that stands for the dominant trait. So we're not going to have any W's in the mix when we're talking about flower color because the dominant is purple, and so we're going to use P. So capital P, that means the plant has 2 dominant alleles. The flowers will be purple because that's the dominant trait. There's at least 1 dominant allele there, so that's what wins. And then even if the plant has a capital P and a lowercase p, 1 of each dominant and recessive, the plant will still have purple flowers because the dominant one wins. Only if there are 2 lowercase p's, 2 recessive alleles, will the flowers be white. Some of you may be interested in this, some of you might just want to skip this part, but this is one more way to phrase things. I'll always say it both ways so that you don't get too confused, but here's another vocab term we can talk about. So homozygous recessive, homo means same, and recessive, they're both recessive. So lowercase a, that's 2 recessive alleles, that organism will show the recessive trait. Heterozygous, hetero means different or one of each. So if you have a capital A, lowercase a, that's heterozygous. That one still shows a dominant trait because there's at least one dominant allele there. And I guess I did two B's there. And then there's homozygous dominant, capital A, capital A, capital B, capital B, capital C, capital C. That's 2 dominant alleles. For sure, that one's going to be dominant because there isn't even a recessive allele in the mix anywhere. It'll show the dominant trait. So again, the only way to see the recessive form of the trait in the individual is to have 2 recessive alleles. That's also known as homozygous recessive. Look at this for a second. For example, you can give me a thumbs up. And if you look at the video in the corner, I have a pretty straight thumb for the most part, pretty straight up and down, definitely not as far back bent as the one in the picture that's labeled hitchhiker's thumb. So you might have a straight thumb, they're calling it regular thumb, but they're both pretty regular thumbs. It's just straight versus hitchhikers. And the straight thumb is actually dominant over the recessive hitchhiker's thumb. So if you have a hitchhiker's thumb, you have the recessive form of the trait, which means you must have 2 recessive alleles, homozygous recessive little s, or lowercase s. For me, I don't know what alleles I have. I know it could be either heterozygous or homozygous dominant, either one, because all I know is I don't have 2 recessive alleles, or I would have a hitchhiker's thumb. And you'd have to look a little bit more into my family history of thumbs to figure out which is it? Is it heterozygous, or am I homozygous dominant? So you might be able to tell what your alleles are, or you might not. Okay, one more set of vocabulary words that will actually make things a little bit easier is phenotype versus genotype. So genotype, I'll start with that one. That sounds like gene, so that one kind of gives you a clue as to what it means. The genotype is, instead of me saying, what alleles do I have, I could just say, what genotype do I have? That's the alleles that determine the trait. So maybe my genotype is heterozygous, big S, little s for thumbs. I for sure do know my phenotype. Phenotype is the observed trait. So instead of me, so far I've been saying just what trait do you have, I could also be saying what phenotype do you have? Do you have straight thumb, or do you have hitchhiker's thumb? Does the plant have purple flowers or white flowers? That's its phenotype. And that's the observed trait. Pheno means like showing up or able to be observed. So that might help us a little bit. I'll still try to say it a few different ways as we move on. Let's do some questions, and if these end up being confusing, you can always go back and look, rewind the video a little bit and go back and watch parts again if you end up being confused on these, but I'll explain the answers as we go, so hopefully that helps if you're still confused about a few of these things. So I just made up some unicorn genetics to have some fun with it. And let's assume that in unicorns, rainbow mane, capital R, is dominant over purple mane, lowercase r. Let's say a unicorn has the genotype, capital R, lowercase r. What is its phenotype? So its genotype is heterozygous, big R, little r. We know that rainbow mane is dominant, purple mane is recessive. What is its phenotype? What trait does it have? Does it have rainbow mane or purple mane? Can think about that for a second. Okay, if you said rainbow mane, you are correct. So because this unicorn has at least one dominant allele, it has a capital R, it for sure will have the dominant phenotype. Its genotype is heterozygous, and those always have the dominant phenotype. So rainbow mane. Okay, now we'll do one backwards. In a species of dragons, again, I'm just making up some dragon genetics. Let's say that fire-breathing, capital F, is dominant over non-fire-breathing, lowercase f. A poor dragon is unable to breathe fire. What is its genotype? So its phenotype is that it cannot breathe fire. That's recessive. What is its genotype? So you can think about that and then either say it out loud to yourself or write it down. Okay, if you said lowercase f, or homozygous recessive, you are correct. We know that to express the recessive phenotype, the recessive trait, this dragon must have 2 recessive alleles, no dominant alleles, because if it did have a dominant allele, it would be able to breathe fire. So lowercase f is the correct answer. Let's do one more. If tongue rolling is dominant over no tongue rolling, and I can roll my tongue, which I can, this is what this means. What is my genotype? So first of all, you can all take a minute to see if you can roll your tongue and do that. That's kind of fun. And then if you can roll your tongue, that's dominant. If you cannot roll your tongue, that's recessive. So you can figure out first my genotype, that I can roll my tongue. And then maybe even you can figure out your own genotype, or at least what it could be, based on if you can or cannot roll your tongue. So I'll give you a minute to do that. And again, tongue rolling is capital T, no tongue rolling is lowercase t, tongue rolling is dominant. All right, so a little bit of a trick question. There are actually 2 options for what my genotype can be. These are what they are. Since I have the dominant phenotype of tongue rolling, my genotype is either capital T, or capital T, lowercase t. So I'm either homozygous dominant or I'm heterozygous. We don't know. Again, we'd have to look into my family history of tongue rolling a little bit to figure that out. But if you cannot roll your tongue, then you for sure have lowercase t, without a doubt, because that is the only way that you would be able to not roll your tongue. And you can thank your parents for that, for giving you those alleles. All right, we are going to do an activity now, and it has to do with some probability and figuring out the traits that a creature is going to have based on, again, some genetics I made up. So this is what you'll need, and this is what it'll look like. You'll need some paper, pencil, or writing utensils, markers or colored pencils, and then either a coin or a dice or something to roll to get answers, to get probabilities. And then, as with any activities that we'll be sharing, feel free to make this your own. Like I said, I made up genetics for some sort of vague creature, but if you have an animal or mythical creature or something that you're really interested in, you can pretty much scrap what I give you and make it your own. You can make it all about unicorns or dragons like my previous examples, or really anything else. That's part of the fun. So you can always start with the one I'm giving you and then do another one that is with a twist for your own, your own interest. So you'll see that this box here on the right is an example of what your paper might look like. I did not draw one. This one I found online, so no pressure if your drawing does not look like that either. But basically you'll be writing genotype at the top, and then we'll be going through and flipping the coin or rolling the dice to figure out what your creature's genotype will be. And then after you finish all of that, you'll be drawing the phenotype. I'm going to go to the next slide, which has the chart of all the traits that I came up with. But you can always come back to this part of the video if you need to look at this again. Alrighty. So this is the chart that I made. And you'll see the traits listed on the left. The middle is what allele you'll get if you flip heads, or if you're using a dice, you can do like even numbers. And then the right column is what alleles you'll be using if you flip tails, or maybe if you get odd when you roll your dice. So I came up with things for head shape, pattern, number of eyes, teeth, legs, wings type, horn color, tail, fingers, and then you can always create your own for the rest. So the most important thing about this activity is that you will be flipping the coin twice per trait. So you will flip it once for what allele one parent will give you, and again for what allele the other parent will give you. So maybe I'll get heads the first time, and then I would write a big R on my paper, capital R, next to genotype. And then when I flip the coin again and get tails and get a lowercase r, I'd write that right next to it. And I'm going to go back for a moment to show you. So go all the way down the line, writing all these letters out, big R, little r, big P, as you get different answers. And then you can look back to the chart and see, okay, I'm heterozygous for the first trait. Does that mean I have a round head or a square head? And because heterozygous means dominant, that would be round, then you can draw a monster with a round head. And then go down the line. Hopefully we'll get a really diverse range of creatures or monsters or whatever you'd like to call it, or maybe you'll even create your own genetic chart based on your own mythical creature or something like that. And we would love to see what you come up with. You can either have your parents comment with a picture, you can have them post it and tag us, or you can just email it directly to us if you don't want to share it, they don't want to share it, and you just want to show us personally what they came up with, because we are curious to see, and we are really just wanting to create a sense of community during this time of learning and sharing resources. And we're hoping to keep posting videos like this one with not just me, but a variety of instructors sharing some of their favorite activities that might be fun for you and your children to do at home, and just keep the learning moving during this time. We're going to end here so that you can just pause the video to keep this chart up while you do the activity. And then again, please share any ideas with us for topics that you'd like to learn about, or really the kinds of resources that you're looking for during this time, because we're really interested in supporting you, supporting one another. And we hope you're all doing well, and we can't wait to see you back here again soon.